I'm Peter Thiel. I build companies and I support people who are building new things, from social networks to rocket ships.
Peter Thiel is this very important behind-the-scenes figure in the technology industry. He's a venture capitalist, he's an entrepreneur. Most people who live in the world have touched or used or been affected by some product that Peter Thiel either created or played like a huge role in creating.
He is at the nexus of so many interesting companies that are defining not just Silicon Valley, but the world.
Anytime you're talking to like a new interesting company, you don't have to like look that far to find some sort of connection to Thiel.
Thiel, who's, well, very well known as the first outside investor in Facebook, is one of Silicon Valley's most closely watched individuals.
Thiel is also a genius, literally. As a child, he was a math phenom and chess champion.
Peter Thiel, he's also become quite important in the world of national politics. Big funder of Trump, basically personally bankrolling at least a couple of U.S. Senate candidacies.
I mean, Peter Thiel's powerful because he's a billionaire. He's a billionaire and he invests his money in companies that are going to make more profit off of policing, off of surveillance, off of the militarization of the border.
He's been called the king of Techtopia. He's now backing DNA manipulation, meat grown in labs, and a startup island off the coast.
There have been articles about you with young blood and doing all sorts of crazy things.
I want to publicly tell you that I'm not a vampire.
You're not a vampire?
Okay, I'll say, yes, on the record, I'm not a vampire.
Have you ever tried it, by the way?
I have never tried being a vampire.
You never get free, lamb to the slaughter. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? The price of your greed is your son and your daughter. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? Look me in my eyes, tell me everything's not fine. All the people ain't happy, and the river has run dry. You thought you could go free, but the system is done for. If you listen real closely, there's a knock at your front door. You'll never get free, lamb to the slaughter. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? The price of your greed is your son and your daughter. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? When there's blood in the water.
This is probably sort of a very unfashionable category to use, but if you said, what is, what's the political category you would use to describe a founder? And I think, most founders, they're sort of like a king. It's obviously not a democracy, it's not a republic. It's sort of like a king.
What do you think motivates Thiel?
Money. Money and power. Fame is not necessarily the thing that motivates him, but the ability to influence events is a real trigger point for him.
So, Star Trek or Star Wars?
Obviously Star Wars. That's the capitalist one. It's all about Han Solo trying to get the money to pay off his loans. Star Trek is a communist show in which you basically have no money since everything can be made by the transporter. Back when my parents came to America, they brought me here as a one-year-old. Opportunity was everywhere. The future felt limitless.
He was born in Germany. He came to the U.S. when he was a little boy. Parents were very strict, conservative, evangelicals, middle-class existence. His dad was an engineer and basically bounced around the country and the world working on mining projects.
My dad was an engineer. My mom ended up being a homemaker after I was born. They were very focused on education. Went to 7 different elementary schools as a kid. I think of myself as always having been both, in some ways, a little bit of an outsider and a little bit of an insider. So it was some sort of combination of that insider-outsider perspective that I think shaped things a lot.
My book is called The Contrarian, and I picked that because, first of all, it's kind of how Thiel sees himself. I think his identity as a contrarian is probably more important to him than his identity, as a gay man or as an immigrant or maybe even as an American.
Most people believe that capitalism and competition are synonyms, and I believe they are antonyms.
He was and is introverted and a bit of a loner, somebody who is, I think, most comfortable dwelling, in his own head. The people he went to school with, one thing they liked to do was drive around and pick up for sale signs from other people's houses and then set them all up on Peter Thiel's, lawn and say, I hear you're moving. It's what a way to, other somebody to make them feel like an outsider.
I probably am a bit of an outsider in many ways, and that has good things and bad things about it. It does have the tremendous benefit of forcing you to really think about what's going on with institutions, with our society, and then look for ways to make them better. The only thematic mistake, parenthetically, that you made is when you moved your knight to the side. You never want to do that.
Thiel played chess. He was a nationally ranked chess player. As a boy, he had a sticker on his chessboard that said, "Born to win." And one time that Thiel lost a chess match in high school, it was by accident. The boy he was playing just kind of stumbled into checkmate. He just completely lost it from that moment on. Basically was completely thrown off his game because he's just so used to winning. He got great grades. He's the kind of person who, was writing in his friends' yearbooks about how his grades were better than their grades and wanted to be the best, A+, 100%.
He's not a very sociable, intentionally likable guy. He doesn't go out of his way to try to make people comfortable. It's almost the reverse. He delights in debating and kind of picking at someone who has put forth an argument that he disagrees with. And he's a very deep thinker. He's very thoughtful. He's the standout. And it was that way when he went to Stanford during the late 80s. And he's always been a very private person. He was never surrounded by a big group of friends. He was never the life of a party. He celebrated his first semester at Stanford when he got a 4.0 by finding another guy who had a 4.0 and then arguing with him about why his 4.0 was better.
He thought that Stanford would be perfect for him. He expected to be sort of welcomed by, sort of like-minded, type A intellectuals, people, and also conservatives. And instead, was greeted by, people expressing, socialist and even Marxist ideas. So it was way more liberal than Peter Thiel had anticipated. He ended up kind of processing all that as political. It was him as a conservative against these, left-wing crazy people.
For months at Stanford, students protested a program called Western Civilization. Stanford's faculty debated whether Western Civ was biased. Finally, last month, the faculty senate decided the program was biased.
The notorious chant was, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western culture's gotta go." It was not a demand for inclusion, it was a demand for exclusion.
This is no field day for Moscow or its sympathizers.
I grew up in the late 70s, 80s, at a time when there was a specter of communism, totalitarianism, and in some sense, libertarianism was the opposite of a totalitarian state. I started an independent student newspaper called the Stanford Review. It was a sort of libertarian paper where we challenged a lot of the campus taboos and create some space for some dissenting voices. I've often said that our greatest political problem is the problem of political correctness, properly understood, because that's how we limit the debate, how we aren't allowed to, consider all the possibilities. And certainly, I think the universities share, a lot of blame for this.
The multicultural side is the side where we look for the victims. The politically correct side is the side where we go after the victimizers. The two are inextricably interconnected. The way these speech codes work in practice is that you, as a student, will err on the side of silence. They are incredibly inhibiting of controversial discourse.
The idea with the Stanford Review was basically to try to push the buttons of their liberal classmates and faculty. Today, we kind of have a vocabulary for this now. I think we call it trolling, where it's like publishing columns, statements, jokes, or whatever that seem to walk right up to the line on things like race or gender identity, or even cross it.
You know, running a libertarian newspaper was an incredible experience as a manager. You sort of had to deal with some very stubborn, headstrong, talented people, and I think that prepared me well for any challenge that you might encounter in business.
After graduating from Stanford Law School, Thiel had these grand ambitions, which he was perfectly positioned to take advantage of. He'd done everything right. He'd gotten the top grades. He'd checked every box.
I did well enough in law school to be hired by a big New York law firm. But it turned out to be a very strange place. From the outside, everybody wanted to get in, and from the inside, everybody wanted to get out.
He got a really good clerkship right out of law school, and then he got a job at Sullivan & Cromwell, which is like, one of the top white shoe law firms.
His great goal, his pie in the sky, was getting a clerkship at the Supreme Court.
Just as I was leaving the law firm, I got an interview for a Supreme Court clerkship. And this is sort of the top prize that you can get as a young lawyer. It was the absolute last stage of the competition. But I lost. And at the time, I was totally devastated. It seemed just like the end of the world.
Thiel is used to working hard and winning. The fact that he did not win the Supreme Court justice clerkship was a huge blow to him. It definitely set him on a different path.
About a decade later, I ran into an old friend, someone who had helped me prepare for the Supreme Court interview, whom I hadn't seen in years. His first words to me were not, hi, Peter, or how are you doing, but rather, so, aren't you glad you didn't get that clerkship? And if I hadn't lost that last competition, we both knew that I never would have left the track laid down since middle school. I wouldn't have moved to California and co-founded a startup. I wouldn't have done anything new.
By the late 90s, Thiel was in some ways kind of a failure, kind of lost. And so he hadn't been a very successful or remarkable, lawyer. He gets a job in finance, but again, that doesn't last very long either, and comes back to Silicon Valley. But right at that time that he came back, something big was happening, which is the tech industry.
What is Newton? Newton is digital.
If you really wanted to make money, the way to do it was to find a tech founder.
So how did you come up with the idea for PayPal?
We were looking at all the new payments companies where people were trying to start on the internet in the 90s, and we realized that you had to do something with real money, and you had to do something where you could get people involved who weren't signed up yet.
He was giving a talk to a very small group of students at Stanford about currency trading, and a guy named Max Levchin was this incredible coder, self-taught, and he was also really interested in cryptography. And over breakfast, Max Levchin basically pitches him his idea, which is to create software for Palm Pilots.
The big PayPal insight that we sort of came up with in the summer of '99 was the idea of linking money and email. You want to be doing something where you think it's going to actually change the world, make the world a dramatically better place.
PayPal invented online payments. We would never have been able to split a check or pay the babysitter or whatever if Peter Thiel and Max Levchin hadn't come around and invented this thing. Thiel is a really great opportunist and a great investor, and I think basically picked a pretty obvious opportunity with a really smart partner who could build the software.
You always want to get the team, the technology, and the business strategy. So you have to get all three of those to work.
He was never a front man like some of his colleagues that had also succeeded while working with him at PayPal. These were all young, bright, wealthy, and very ambitious men, all men, who wanted to make their mark on the world.
Fortune magazine does a photo shoot and comes up with the idea, really good idea, to get all these guys and dress them up in Godfather outfits and basically stage it like a Godfather shoot. And amazingly, they all showed up, with Peter Thiel as like Don Corleone, and Max Levchin, his co-founder at PayPal, and the rest of the other guys, you know, Reid Hoffman and the YouTube guys and the Yelp guys. The PayPal Mafia is a group where loyalty is the thing that is rewarded, and the people who are loyal become more successful and are given, you know, more money to start companies and are given better jobs and so on. And so in that way, it really is like, you know, like a mafia. Good startups by nature push the envelope. That pushing the envelope, breaking the rules is a good thing. And it becomes amoral. I mean, growth and wealth and dominance starts to justify almost any action. The vision behind PayPal and the vision that Peter Thiel was pushing towards was you could basically put it into a bank account and go on your merry way. But you could choose to keep it in PayPal. And once you did that, that would be basically untrackable money. And there's an interview in Wired where he's going on and on about how the revolutionary potential and the way this will erode the sovereignty of the nation state. That's a pretty radical statement.
When I was starting PayPal, where we had this sort of vision that we were going to lead this financial revolution, a libertarian revolution against all central banks. We're going to liberate money from government control, and we're going to go to this trans-political, technological level to transform things.
PayPal, and this is true of all digital currency efforts, big ones anyway, inevitably attracted money launderers and criminals. They weren't checking IDs. They weren't doing anything to make sure that the money wasn't being used in an improper way initially. This was a huge problem for PayPal, and they developed this network analysis approach where they would basically draw a big spider web showing transactions and where the transactions were coming from. And they basically started turning over information to the FBI, and the FBI, made a bunch of money laundering cases based on the information that PayPal was giving them. And there are stories from that era of, the FBI being, sort of embedded in the PayPal office, which of course is a kind of a weird thing for a libertarian. And I mean, getting fraud under control was, I think, what allowed PayPal first to survive. It allowed them to go public, and ultimately, it created Palantir. Thiel was freaked out by 9/11, I think, just like many people. It had a kind of a personal dimension. When PayPal was going public, he and another executive were on a plane that was flying out of New York on September 10th. He felt like that he was in close proximity to the actual terrorists, but he also processed it in a political way.
I think the threat of Islamic terrorism in the U.S. may be really a long-term thing. The World Trade Center may not have been an isolated instance, and this is going to be a real problem.
What we need to understand is that the Islam extremists have declared war on us.
You don't like America? Leave this country. We're proud to be Americans. USA! USA!
The terrorist attacks have united much of America, but some Arab Americans are feeling left out, fearful they could become the next target of misguided anger.
After 9/11, the U.S. government felt that we had missed warning signs, that there were these hijackers in the United States taking flying lessons, buying plane tickets, and that if you had just somehow kind of like filtered through the data, looked through everyone's background and saw that, where these guys were from and the profile, that you might have been able to surveil them and maybe ultimately stop the attacks. Thiel saw a business opportunity, which was to take the approach that PayPal had used for money laundering and sell it to the U.S. government.
Our brave men and women in uniform put their lives on the line every day to protect our way of life. Palantir, protecting the protector since 2004.
Something like Palantir is the key to stopping major terrorist attacks. I don't think we're going to do it by projecting military force throughout the world. I think we will do it by sort of very cleverly uncovering these conspiracies before they come together.
Co-founded by Peter Thiel back in 2003, its mission, providing software that customers use to integrate volumes of data from images to spreadsheets into a central platform where it can then be securely analyzed and interpreted.
Consider it just like a big power strip, and Palantir just allows the customer to plug in as many plugs as they want, right? Now, the data that they use can be publicly available, like US Census data, driver's license plates. It could be the person's individual location history, where they last texted someone. It could be really anything that that customer has access to. And that's where it gets a little tricky.
Favorite writers?
Tolkien.
Okay.
I'm still, I was powerfully shaped by Tolkien as a kid, so that's still the absolute favorite.
Palantir's name refers to the all-seeing stones of the Lord of the Rings trilogy that allows the user, evil wizard Sauron, to see what the enemies are doing and kind of what's going on.
It's kind of interesting, of course, that Thiel picked something that's kind of like a tool for evil to describe his company. But I think that was kind of deliberate, because part of what made Palantir attractive, like both to government and to companies, is like the edginess, is the idea that like maybe this technology is too good, maybe it's too scary, maybe it's the kind of thing that if it were not handled well could be abused. And this is why Palantir ultimately, leads to success.
As Palantir prepares to go public, we'd like to take a moment to celebrate all the accomplishments throughout the years of spying, targeting, and murdering people across the globe.
Thiel is famously a libertarian, but what kind of libertarian starts a data mining defense contractor that takes money from the CIA, that its whole business is like just gathering huge amounts of data, on behalf of the US government and big intelligence agencies, as Thiel has done with Palantir? How does somebody who's an immigrant, come to support a candidate like Trump, who ran to build the wall and to toss out the immigrants? That's a contradiction.
It's not a lack of judgment that leads Americans to vote for Trump. We're voting for Trump because we judge the leadership of our country to have failed.
When Trump made that grab him by the pussy comment, a lot of people wondered whether this comment by Trump would actually sink his campaign. And Thiel comes in with $1.25 million. Now, at the time, he told people close to him who shared with me that he considered it the least controversial of any of his decisions.
Now, I don't agree with everything Donald Trump has said and done, and I don't think the millions of other people voting for him do either. Nobody thinks his comments about women were acceptable. I agree, they were clearly offensive and inappropriate.
When I was a kid, the great debate was about how to defeat the Soviet Union, and we won. Now we are told that the great debate is about who gets to use which bathroom. This is a distraction from our real problems. Who cares? Of course, every American has a unique identity. I am proud to be gay. I am proud to be a Republican. But most of all, I am proud to be an American.
When he took to the stage for the Republican National Convention as the first openly gay man to do so, he spent no time focusing on that. He acknowledged it and then dismissed, kind of undercut the entire part of his identity, saying that identity politics has ruined politics.
I don't pretend to agree with every plank in our party's platform, but fake culture wars only distract us from our economic decline. And nobody in this race is being honest about it except Donald Trump.
Thiel had been, a really important Trump supporter What he brought to Trump initially during the election was credibility, that a real business guy believes in Trump. That was valuable.
Silicon Valley comes to Trump Tower today. President-elect Donald Trump hosting a tech summit, bringing together leaders from some of America's top companies.
He sat down with tech giants from Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook, and more. They discussed innovation, immigration, trade, and government regulation.
We're going to be there for you, and you'll call my people, you'll call me. It doesn't make any difference. We have no formal chain of command.
So on December 14th, 2016, a little over a month after the election, Thiel convenes this meeting in Trump Tower with basically the CEOs of the biggest tech companies in the United States. I think Trump was really aware of the value that Thiel brought to him, and you saw it in the meeting.
This is a truly amazing group of people. I won't tell you the hundreds of calls we've had asking to come to this meeting. And I will say Peter was sort of saying, no, that company's too small. And these are monster companies. But I want to start by thanking Peter, because he saw something very early, maybe before we saw it. And of course, he's known for that in a different way.
And in the body language, Trump, kind of grabs his hand, and there's this awkward kind of moment of like bro tenderness where he's sort of like, Thiel's looking there like, just like never been more uncomfortable in his entire life. These tech CEOs had opposed Donald Trump, either personally or in public. But once the cameras leave, nobody calls him on the plan to ban Muslims from coming to the United States. Many of them had publicly deplored. Nobody calls him on the trade war with China, which again, they were officially supposed to be opposed to. They basically moved to like try to work together. And it was just all bullshit. They were much closer politically and ideologically to Thiel than most people realized, and just as willing as he was to work with people in power.
Deportation up, up! Liberation down, down! Deportation up, up!
Politicians on both sides of the aisle say that technology is going to make things better and faster and easier, but actually they're facilitating human rights abuses.
We will begin removing the more than 2 million criminal illegal immigrants from the country.
If you don't want your child to be separated, then don't bring them across the border illegally. It's not our fault that somebody does that.
Many children have been separated from their parents. The numbers aren't clear. The New York Times previously reported that, quote, more than 700 children have been taken from adults claiming to be their parents, including more than 100 under the age of 4.
Seeing that there was more and more raids happening directly in people's homes, directly in people's workplaces, particularly under the Trump administration, this made us really want to do a lot of research into how that was happening. People on the ground calling us and being like, how did they get my address? How did they know he was my cousin? How did they know what car I was driving or where I had driven the last couple of days?
Palantir sells him to ICE. We will not be complicit. We will not be.
The data mining firm Palantir faces backlash over its partnership with ICE.
One of the first concrete examples that we saw where Palantir software was being used was in an operation where ICE was trying to prosecute the sponsors of unaccompanied kids that were crossing the border. And ICE decided to use Palantir software to create charges against the sponsors. The main product that Palantir offers ICE is the integrated case management system. And this is basically a custom-made software where ICE can then use all of the data it has to then create files on people to be able to go after them for deportation proceedings or to try to press charges against them.
Fear tonight after what was the largest workplace immigration raid in a single state in U.S. history. Some undocumented immigrants in Mississippi locked themselves in their homes today. ICE officials say 680 people were arrested yesterday at food processing plants around the state.
I don't want my dad.
Today, we saw the aftermath of the ICE raids in Mississippi. Children begging to see their parents.
My dad didn't do nothing. He's not a criminal.
Immigration officials couldn't say for sure whether any of the nearly 400 people still in custody are single parents who have no one to take care of their children.
Under the Trump administration, there's a huge expansion of the tip line where regular people were encouraged to call in and, use terror against their neighbor, their loved one, their employees. And so the Falcon tip line was one of the places where information came in for this raid. And that was one of Palantir's products for ICE.
It's imperative from a libertarian perspective that we use these technologies to try to narrowly focus on suspicious behavior and prevent it before it happens. And that's how we will have a world that protects more civil liberties in one way or another.
Palantir would say, hey, this data is already out there. Our software just pulls it together so that you can see it all at once and make a smart decision based on information that's out there.
So the way that ICE is using data and technology to expand its power, to expand its reach, to no longer need warrants to get information and just use a data broker to try to access it, impacts all of us because services that are provided by Palantir become models for different local police departments, right? Across the country, we've seen cities like Los Angeles or New Orleans start to use Palantir services in their policing to horrible consequences. If ICE is able to get away with it, better believe that in just a couple of years, your local police department is going to be using it, and then it's going to be used against everyone.
The Los Angeles Police Department used Palantir in high crime rate areas in the hopes of predicting where problems could erupt and then stopping it. And what police officers would do would be to collect pictures of people in an area known for gang activity, put them in their database, and gradually start filling out profiles on each of these individuals, whether or not it had been proven they were part of a gang or not. They were also able to get access to their cell phone records, their license plates of cars that they owned and drove, and then continue to track those people.
Police in Los Angeles are trying to predict the future.
We know where crime happened yesterday, but where is it going to happen tomorrow and the next day?
And they're not alone. More and more departments are using data-driven algorithms to forecast crime.
And there was one individual that we spoke to for a feature that we wrote who said he was not part of a gang in LA, and he had worked really hard to get out of a gang. Nevertheless, he was hanging out with someone who had just been jumped in, and his picture was taken by an LAPD officer, and he laughed and said, well, welcome to the gang database.
Doing this work can sometimes feel hard because you don't want to be telling people all of the ways that the government or the police could have access to information about you. But this is actually not about trying to create more paranoia. This is actually about trying to create more power in communities. And the way you do that is you peel back the curtain. You actually unveil what's happening. You expose the companies, you expose the billionaires that are behind it.
There are people who are terrified of saying anything that could even be vaguely interpreted as negative to neutral about Peter Thiel. He is known as a vengeful person. He secretly bankrolled and bankrupted Gawker, which is a publication, for its role in publicizing sex tapes of Hulk Hogan.
Essentially, for revenge, Gawker had outed Peter Thiel, almost a decade earlier, had published a story saying that he was gay, and Thiel basically was using that as a justification for funding this case that ultimately bankrupted, a media entity.
Knowing what you know now, do you have any regrets about writing that story?
I have no regrets about writing that story.
Why not?
First of all, I don't believe I outed Peter Thiel. I believe Peter Thiel outed himself to a wide circle of people within Silicon Valley, who then took it upon themselves to say, well, this is okay for us to know, but the unwashed masses should not know such a detail about one of our own.
Gawker had outed him as being gay, and that was something that Peter held very, very privately. He was a very private person, and this upset him, and he held on to that grudge, and he struck back. And the amount of force that he brought to bear on that, hobbled and ultimately bankrupted Gawker.
Well, do you think what happened to Gawker could happen to other news publications? I mean, could wealthy, powerful people seek revenge against a news organization because of something they didn't like and use their influence and money to take them out.
You know, they shouldn't. Wealthy people shouldn't do that. I think if they try, they won't succeed. You know, Gawker was a pretty flimsy business. It was a bad business. It didn't make that much money, but they could have withstood all the lawsuits. They lost because of an enormous verdict that came in against them.
Money speaks, and billionaires have power, and unless we want to restrict them in their funding of political campaigns and in other things that they can do with their money, they're going to spend their money as a substitute for speech.
It's not an understatement at all to say that there is a huge amount of fear and mystique around him because he doesn't always work directly.
He pursued this audacious revenge plot to destroy a media outlet, completely, in secret. So he's somebody who's always who's never transparent. And in fact, he thinks that transparency is like a bad thing, like on a moral or ethical or cosmic scale.
ProPublica article highlighting how tech mogul Peter Thiel turned a Roth IRA account into a $5 billion tax-free piggy bank.
Most IRAs have a limit of $6,000 a year in annual contributions. That was installed just to prevent this kind of abuse.
What a brilliant move right at the outset to see that this could be done.
There's a set of billionaires and super rich people that are shielding fortunes from taxation. But what we found is that Peter Thiel at least appears to be in a league of his own. The Roth IRA was created by Congress in 1997. The idea was that you would allow people to put a couple $1,000s into this special account and invest it. If the investment goes up in value and you sell the investment, you get to keep all the profit tax-free. Peter Thiel and some other billionaires have now transformed that into this tax shelter for these multi-billion-dollar fortunes.
Speaking of big money and where does it go, some of the wealthiest people in the U.S., like Warren Buffett, Michael Bloomberg, and Elon Musk, pay little or sometimes nothing in federal income taxes compared to the massive amounts of money that they make each year.
Back in 1999, before Peter Thiel was a billionaire, he opened a Roth IRA account and he used the money inside of it to buy 1.7 million shares of PayPal, so at a cost of 1/10 of a penny per share. At the most basic level, Peter Thiel's power flows from his wealth, and you can't understand how he got so rich without understanding the Roth IRA. In 2002, suddenly he has $28 million to play with. Pretty soon after that, he was an early investor in Facebook. If he'd had to pay taxes, maybe he wouldn't have been able to buy as many early shares of Facebook.
She offer you some waters?
Oh, yeah, we're cool.
She's on the way. Come on in. Must be Mark.
Hi. We took a look at everything, and congratulations. We're going to start you off with a $500,000 investment.
You were an early investor in Facebook, and the Facebook movie has just come out.
Well, there are a number of factual inaccuracies about the movie. It certainly portrays the people in a much worse light than I know them, having worked with a number of these people for the last 6 years. I think it's an incredibly dedicated, awesome team of people that has created tremendous value for themselves, their investors, and the world at large.
So after Zuckerberg takes Thiel's money, they reincorporate the company, and they set it up so that Zuckerberg would have complete power over Facebook in perpetuity. It became the new normal, where the CEO founder will have absolute control indefinitely. Thiel is one of the key people who made Facebook happen. He's the longest-serving board member, one of the closest confidants to Mark Zuckerberg, probably a mentor to Zuckerberg.
He was massively influential on my thinking, right? I mean, like a lot of the early lessons that I took on how to think about strategy came from Peter.
Peter Thiel, big investor in Facebook, board member, advising Mark Zuckerberg, don't give in to the pressure. Stick to the decision to continue with political advertising, even after all the criticism.
we have created this situation where, a handful of companies control like enormous swaths of our data. And so with respect to Thiel, the two most important companies are Facebook, the largest media entity in human history, has, data on billions of people, like half the world's population, maybe more. And Palantir, which not only has access to huge amounts of data through the US government and through, US allies, but has, relationships with intelligence agencies and the military and huge companies. So Thiel has all this incredible influence.
I think my future is going to continue to be in the tech industry. That's what I'm good at. That's what I enjoy doing. I always have this view a somewhat schizophrenic view of politics, where I think it's a horrible business. It's incredibly destructive. A lot of it is like trench warfare on the Western Front, where there's crazy amounts of carnage and nothing ever changes. And then that's one part of my schizophrenic view. The other part is that it's really important. There's some problems that can't be solved outside of this political arena. And the way I deal with my schizophrenia is that I occasionally get involved, but don't want to make it a full-time thing.
After Trump lost the election in November 2020, Thiel basically moved to support the faction of the Republican Party that argues that he didn't lose.
We are up against a media that lies to us, schools that teach our kids to hate our country, and corporations that have gotten so big, they think they're bigger than America. It's time to put this country first. We need to enforce the law, and we need to finish the wall.
Masters is basically a longtime aide to Peter Thiel. He was the co-author of 0 to 1, Thiel's book. So he's like Thiel deputy, and he's running as this hard right Trumpist, talking about building the wall and basically finishing Trumpism. And also, of course, he's promoting a handful of positions that don't seem entirely consistent with being a populist, but are certainly consistent with being buddies with Peter Thiel.
It's no secret that Peter Thiel is supporting me in my campaign. He maxed out in hard dollars, $5,800. And of course, he's funding a super PAC that is pro-me. I think he put $10 million in.
You're a venture capitalist, a graduate of Stanford, you work for a billionaire. Are you a tool of Peter Thiel to advance the interests of billionaires here in Washington, D.C.?
Democrats are very good at hiding the source of money and dark money. They play that game. When someone like Peter Thiel, on the other hand, wants to support a candidate, he does write one check, and that becomes, national news. I think it's way more transparent.
Peter has also thrown his weight behind someone by the name of J.D. Vance.
The leaders of this country have decided they're going to reward their friends with special tax breaks and not the companies right here in Middletown, Ohio.
Now, J.D. was a longtime employee of Peter's at one of his venture firms.
Every issue, I believe, traces back to this fact. On the one hand, the elites in the ruling class of this country are robbing us blind. And on the other hand, if you dare complain about it, you are a bad person. And I'm here to tell you, we need a new politics for a new generation. The old way of doing things ain't working.
With Peter Thiel's recent entrance into the political realm as a major donor, one thing that's been going through my head is Congress holds the power to essentially break Peter Thiel's Roth IRA. It only takes one U.S. senator to stop a lot of these things from going through. That's enormous power.
Thiel's network of people makes him powerful. So does the money to back it up.
You have sort of the inner circle, the PayPal mafia. Then you have people who maybe run a company backed by somebody in the PayPal mafia, or run a company backed by Thiel, or run an investment firm that's largely backed by Thiel. And then you have these kind of outer rings, which are employees or even aspirants, people who just read Peter Thiel's books and are obsessed with him and just watch every one of his YouTube videos and spend, their later teens and early 20s doing whatever they can to get on the inside. And Thiel saw this and created kind of an on-ramp to bring them into the inside, which is the Thiel Fellowship.
Peter Thiel made billions co-founding PayPal and investing in Facebook. Now he wants Americans to think twice before going to college mindlessly.
I think we need to have a broader debate about college. We have this runaway student debt problem. Was $300 billion in 2000. It's now $1.7 trillion today. Students can't pay off their debt if they go to a lesser college, especially.
And then you basically tell people that if you get a diploma, you're saved. Otherwise you go to hell. You go to Yale or you go to jail.
Peter has a rather exciting announcement to make here at Disrupt.
Well, we've been offering grants of up to $100,000 to up to 20 people under age 20 for starting something new.
For dropping out of school.
Stopping out of school.
He paid college students from top universities $100,000 to drop out of those universities for 2 years and build something. At this point, there are hundreds of Thiel fellows that have gone through this. So he has this whole new generation of people who are very grateful to him as a mentor, as a funder, as someone who inspired them to take the jump.
It's about 4:16 in the morning. Arrived at the airport, ready to go.
I'm working on a product called Bambina, and I'm tracking vital signs in babies.
Hive is a crowdsourced supercomputer.
Prime is a modular wheelchair, which is easily customizable.
I have created an algorithm that I named DocBot.
I'm here to end cancer.
Basically, every year, 20 or so young people become Thiel Fellows.
We have to convince the judges that our ideas are worth a six-figure investment.
My mom actually took me aside and she said, Alex, drop out of school.
My parents told me, you're an idiot if you drop out.
If I get the fellowship, I'll definitely drop out of school.
Good luck, and whether or not you end up receiving a Thiel Fellowship, know that your work's important.
A lot of them don't go anywhere, right? Many startups fail, but some of them have, and it creates this kind of on-ramp and a way to broaden the network. You create all these like mini Peter Thiels, young people who basically, put their lives on hold and gave up like going to Harvard to like work for Peter Thiel.
There's no right time or wrong time to be an entrepreneur. The time is when people find something they're incredibly passionate about, and that's when they should start and do it. We have nothing against education. We think education is a good thing.
He also has, I think personally, right, like has a desire to like somehow defy his own biology. Thiel's ideology isn't just like, you can break all the rules and be rich and famous. It's like, you can break all the rules, be rich and famous, and be immortal.
The other cliche goes like this: live each day as if it were your last. The best way to take this as advice is to do exactly the opposite. Live each day as if you will live forever.
Arguing that this is like an area of science that everyone has sort of ignored, and people are like trying to cure cancer or trying to like, come up with treatments for malaria, but what they really should be trying to cure is death.
What are you doing differently? Are you taking immortality pills, some super exercise regimen?
I'm investing in a lot of biotechnology companies. I think on the nutrition side, there are some very basic things I think that can be done. You should not eat sugar. That's probably the one nutritional rule.
Do you not eat sugar?
I still eat some, but not as much as I used to. The main drastic thing that I'm doing is I'm on HGH, the human growth hormone stuff.
On a daily basis?
On a daily basis.
Among the kind of like types of research that Thiel was funding into life extension, one of them is called parabiosis. It's a fringe idea that you can take blood from younger individuals and transfuse it into older individuals, and that somehow that will like basically allow these older individuals to like repair their bodies and live longer.
The quality won't be high until the quality won't be high until we have a lot of people opt into the network. So that presents a little bit of a unique...
Everything okay?
I don't know. So, Gavin, Bryce is...
Very discreet. Keep going. This is great.
Is Bryce your assistant?
No, of course not. He's my transfusion associate.
Which is?
Are you really not familiar with parabiosis?
Can't say that I am.
Well, the science is actually pretty fascinating. Regular transfusions of the blood of a younger, physically fit donor can significantly retard the aging process. And Bryce is a picture of health. Just look at him. He looks like a Nazi propaganda poster.
Okay, like maybe Peter Thiel is like a literal vampire. It's not true, but it does have, I think, metaphoric value. He is someone who has created these big companies that are like sucking our data and maybe taking with it like a little bit of our humanity. So he's not a vampire, but there are things that are vampiric, I think, about both how Thiel has done business and about many of the businesses he's been involved in creating. The young people who follow Thiel, who start these tech companies, they genuinely believe that conquering death, that they might live forever, or that they might live, you know, for hundreds of years or something like that. Thiel's done a lot of real good for the world. Many of these technologies have genuinely made our lives better, but once you start saying it's the answer to everything, it's gonna make us gods, you know, that's a little bit scary.